Well, a very happy Tuesday evening to everyone. Here we are, an intermediate ham radio class. It's a class for folks who already have their ham radio license in the United States, the technician level, which is the beginning, and they'd like to advance to the next level, the general class, and later on they could advance to the extra class, which is the highest level in the United States. I'm your instructor tonight, Gary, ham radio call sign, cleverly Whiskey 4 Echo Echo Yankee. Yeah, that's me. And we're going to be talking about Chapter 3 tonight. And when I talk about the chapters, I like to show you the book. This is the the ARRL General Class License Manual, the 10th edition. The blue cover, this is the one that we are using. There are earlier editions, 9th, 8th, etc., but they have old question pools. This has the current question pool. And so this is the book that you want. They're about $30 on Amazon. Maybe your local library has it. But what we try to do is go chapter by chapter each week, cover topics related to amateur radio, electronics, but specific to the test that you take at the end to get your general class license. You get it by passing a 35-question multiple choice test. And all of the questions and all of the answers are right here in the back of the book, and we cover them also in our videos. So happy to have you with us. Tonight we're going to talk about the rules of the road, rules and regulations in amateur radio. You'll be very glad to know that we will not get out the calculator tonight. You will not have to do any fancy formulas. But what we're going to do is talk about, how things have evolved. I mean, radio is about 100 years old, a little older than that. And over time, various agencies have evolved to make sure that everyone stays in their lane and plays nice with the various services that are using the RF spectrum. And we're going to start at the international level, and internationally it's the International Telecommunications Union. And I'm going to let them, in a video, tell you all about themselves.
ITU members connect the world. The ITU family is growing, ever more diverse, to deliver on the promise of the digital economy. With 193 member states and more than 900 members, from leading companies to SMEs, in areas as diverse as telecoms, internet, broadcast, satellite, software, artificial intelligence, fintech, utilities, automotive, smart cities, to regulators, universities, R&D institutions, international and regional organizations. ITU members come from every corner of the globe. Africa, Americas, Arab states, Asia and the Pacific, Commonwealth of Independent States, Europe, and regional and international. Nowhere else in the world will you find such a rich and diverse network of experts and leaders in the global ICT ecosystem. So what are you waiting for? Become a member. Go to www.itu.int/join.
Okay, you probably don't need to become a member of the ITU, but you can find more videos about the organization here at this URL. They have their own YouTube channel. And the ITU is based in Geneva, Switzerland. They're part of the United Nations. They, of course, have a website with additional information. And they are in charge of civilian telecommunications around the world. So countries are members of the organization, and they lobby ITU for changes if they need more spectrum space or they want to make changes in particular services. It's coordinated so that you just don't have people transmitting in what was once one thing, now it's another. So it keeps it all straight in your lane. In amateur radio, we also have our own international organization. It's the International Amateur Radio Union, and they too have a video. So that's the International Amateur Radio Union. They too have their own website. In the United States, the ARRL is our national organization, and they're a member of IARU, as the Radio Society of Great Britain would be, and others. And IARU then also sits on the board with ITU, so representing international amateur radio interests to the International Telecommunications Union. I mentioned ARRL, that's our national organization. Oh yeah, I've got a video for them too.
Amateur radio, also known as ham radio, is a popular service and hobby that enables so many activities, from public service to scientific experimentation to sheer fun. With more than 740,000 practitioners in the U.S. and 1.75 million worldwide, there are federally licensed amateur radio operators everywhere, in your neighborhood, in your workplace, and in your schools. People just like you use ham radio to communicate without relying on the internet or a cell phone network. And it can go wherever you go. You can hike a trail, climb a mountain, or paddle a river, and take your radio with you. Ham radio even reaches as far as outer space. Ham radio operators can talk to astronauts aboard the International Space Station, talk to other operators through satellites orbiting Earth, and even bounce their radio signals off the moon and back. The amateur radio service is a valued element of neighborhoods and municipalities across the U.S. In times of disaster, when regular communications channels fail, the amateur radio service works with public service agencies such as FEMA, the American Red Cross, and the Salvation Army to assist emergency communications efforts. Amateurs can also use the radios to volunteer within their communities, providing communications for events like county fairs, parades, and road races. Although people get involved with amateur radio for many reasons, they all pass a test to earn the Federal Communications Commission license that shows they have a basic knowledge of the principles of electricity, radio technology, and operating rules. This knowledge has practical everyday applications that educators have used to teach science, technology, engineering, and math concepts. Lots of hams got into the hobby as kids and followed their interest in radio to exciting careers as astronauts, engineers, pilots, and more. The ham radio frequencies begin below the AM broadcast band and extend into extremely high microwave frequencies. Ham radio operators use these frequencies to communicate with each other using microphones, Morse code, and even by interfacing a radio with a computer or tablet to send data, text, or images. Some compete in contests, trying to make the most radio contacts within a certain time frame. Amateur radio has been around for over 100 years, and the technology behind it continues to evolve and advance today. Operators are always finding new ways to explore amateur radio, experimenting with digital applications of this technology through things like coding, mobile apps, and drones. To learn more about the endless possibilities of amateur radio, where the technology is headed, and how you can get involved, visit ARRL, the National Association for Amateur Radio, at www.arrl.org.
And we do recommend, if you're not already a member of ARRL, look into it, consider it. They have great publications that they'll send out to you electronically each month, and also they're the lobbying arm for the hobby with the FCC. The FCC is our overall boss, the radio police, so to speak, and they have their own video, the last one, I promise you.
The Federal Communications Commission, or the FCC, is an independent government agency that regulates interstate and international communications throughout the U.S. We're talking radio and television stations, wireless communications, satellite programs, and cable TV services. The FCC's main focus is to protect you, the consumer, and we've been doing this since the sinking of the Titanic. In 1912, after that tragic event, Congress enacted legislation requiring all radio operators to be licensed and to monitor distress signals across U.S. waters. The federal licenses were distributed by the Federal Radio Commission, which became the FCC in 1934. Since then, as our communication technologies have evolved, so too has the FCC. Today, we are the leading authority for communications law, telecom regulation, and high-tech innovation. Our job is to ensure new technologies can be diverse and local, that a competitive framework exists for those new advances, and that we promote competition, innovation, and investment in broadband services. It's all about ensuring the communications revolution doesn't leave any consumer behind. The FCC is comprised of 5 commissioners appointed by the President and confirmed by the U.S. Senate for a 5-year term. Only 3 can be of the same political party, and none can have any financial interest in any commission-related business. The President selects 1 commissioner to serve as chairperson of the FCC. To better serve you, the consumer, the FCC is divided into areas of expertise. Collectively, we work together to oversee licensing, ensure public safety and homeland security, investigate rules violations, develop programs and innovative services, and last but not least, support consumer education. To learn more about the FCC, go to fcc.gov.
Yeah, everybody's got a website, and the FCC has theirs as well. They are a government organization, and so they're kind of underfunded at the moment, and so they actually are doing the best they can with the resources they have. We have our own set of rules from the FCC. It's Part 97. That deals with the amateur radio service, an official service of the FCC. So if you would like to find out more, you can dig into, and you'll find online copies of the Part 97 rules and regulations. In fact, I may have a slide with the URL for that. But the question is, for us, well, who enforces the regulations? As I mentioned, the FCC's got kind of a limited funding and budgeting right now. It used to be that they would monitor the bands themselves and might, if they found somebody misbehaving, might contact them directly. That's not how it works in the amateur radio bands at the moment. There are volunteer monitors, which we could call the real band police, and it's coordinated via the ARRL. It's the Volunteer Monitor Program. It replaced something they used to have called the Official Observer Program. It's been going on now for 3-4 years now. There are supposed to be 250 volunteer monitors with at least 5 in each ARRL section. They get mandatory training from the ARRL, and notices of rules violations or misbehavior are sent to amateurs via ARRL headquarters. We're policing ourselves. We're doing the best that we can. The whole goal is, in blue text here, to foster a wider knowledge of and better compliance with the FCC rules, and it supports the concepts of self-regulation in the amateur service. The volunteer monitors are an important part of maintaining the rules. If you'd like to find out more, there is a URL here at the ARRL that has additional details. So volunteer monitors get involved in all sorts of interesting activities, and finding stuck transmitters or profanity-related transmissions or whatnot. Ever seen one of those devices up on the top? That's a standard conventional 2-meter, 70 centimeter HT, but it's connected to a very special kind of antenna. Anybody got an idea? It's a radio direction finder. Exactly. It's radio direction finding using phased antennas and measuring signal arrival times and strengths, and you're able to determine the direction of a radio signal. There are also apps for your phone. This is one I found, the SIGTRAX app. That you and other friends can use to, okay, it's on this bearing from me, or it's on this bearing from me, and you can use it to triangulate and find the location of a transmitter that might be causing problems. Radio direction finding, a great tool. One more federal agency, I didn't look for a video, maybe I should have, but the FAA. What does the FAA have to do with us? We're on the ground. Well, FAA is, of course, concerned with safety in the air and safety of aircraft and passengers especially, and anything that could impede that, like your new 200-foot tall tower. Well, you need to know what the regulations are for that. Generally, 200 feet is okay without special permission. You may need to paint or light the tower and register it with the FAA at that height level, but 200 feet is generally the maximum that amateurs go. Now, you have to be greater than 4 miles away from a public use airport in order for that to work out. If you want to know more about tower lighting, this is one of the premier companies that were involved in strobe light technology for amateur towers, flash technology. Excuse me. And they have a great resource at this URL. You can find out all the regulations. If you're close to an airport, here's a couple of considerations. If it's got a long runway, like it's a commercial airport, if the runway is more than 3,200 feet long, then there's a 100-to-1 slope. So that 1 mile would allow you to put up, if you're 1 mile away, you could put up a 52, 53-foot tower. If you're near a heliport, for example, or a shorter runway, well, you could go up to 100 feet in that same instance. So just keep these in mind if you know that you're near an airport. More regulations. A lot of folks want to regulate us. Well, local governments and HOAs. are two that amateur radio operators have to deal with all the time. Local governments, though, have guidance from the FCC. It's called FCC Rule PRB1. And it impacts local and state regulations and says that they're required to reasonably accommodate, those are the key words, to reasonably accommodate amateur radio installations. So local zoning ordinances must take PRB1 into account. So if you want to put up a tower at your location and the county says, no, you can't, you might bring PRB1 into them and say, are you taking this into consideration? Because they have to reasonably accommodate that you need a tower and it needs to be this tall for technical reasons, and you're in. Now, the other one we mentioned is HOAs. PRB1 does not direct HOAs to allow amateur radio. There is an act pending, it was for last year and I think it's carried over into this year, the Amateur Radio Emergency Preparedness Act. It's not a law, it's just proposed, and there are backers, but it has not gone forward yet. Some of the provisions of this legislation would prohibit HOAs from banning amateur radio antennas, would specify an approval process, and provide a federal private right of action to amateur radio operators in disputed cases. Again, this is not law yet, but the ARRL has been promoting it, and your membership there might help them to get the legislation through. All right. We introduced you to the ITU at the very start, the International Telecommunications Region. You might have noted that they have 3 regions in the world. Since they're in Europe, in Geneva, Switzerland, well, they're Region 1. Let me turn on my laser pointer here. All right, so here is Region 1, and then we follow the sun, and Region 2, North America, Central, South America, and then Region 3, Australia, the Pacific, Oceania, out here. These are the 3 ITU regions. And why is that important? Well, if you look at frequency allocations for amateur radio, you can see that some bands, specifically 160 meters, 80 meters, and 40 meters, have different allocations in ITU Region 1, in ITU Region 2, and ITU Region 3. Now, some of them overlap somewhat, but it gives you an interesting case where sometimes there'll be hams in Europe who will say, who are transmitting down in what is our Morse code region of the 40-meter band, but they're transmitting single sideband voice, and they're saying, I'm listening way up in the American single sideband frequencies. You got to listen to this. That's a very wide split. You have to set your radio up so that you're listening low and transmitting high, because you're only allowed to transmit high in the United States. So that's the kind of thing that can come in to play when you have different, if you're in a different ITU region. Now, some American possessions, Hawaii, Alaska, Samoa, Marianas Islands, Guam, are in a different ITU region from the continental United States. And because of that, they have extra special allocations, special cases where they can transmit and we can't. So just the general rule that we want you to know is this. Some FCC regulated amateur stations can operate on frequencies that are different than those used by amateur stations in the continental United States. Okay, that's enough of that. So something that's gotten very popular in amateur radio is operating a station remotely. The internet has made this generally easy to do, and so if you're going to remote a ham radio station, there's got to be some rules about that, right? You can't just do that willy-nilly. So I've been remoting my ham radio station for a long time. I used to have a mountain house in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and that's where I set up my station, but I would operate it from Greenville, South Carolina, via the internet. And so that's why I got involved with flex radios, because they're designed to be operated remotely. So this was my station, actually here at the house here in Anderson, when I first got started with Flex Maestro connecting to my Flex 6600, which then connects to my RF kit amplifier. All of these pieces of equipment can be connected and are connected to the internet and can be controlled from hundreds, if not thousands, of miles away. So that's remote control of amateur radio. And there are also amateur radio services out there as well that allow you to control remote stations. So the rules that are involved: if the transmitter is in the United States, then FCC rules apply. And so you need to have an FCC amateur license to operate it, or be licensed by a station, by a country that has reciprocal operating privileges. If the transmitter is outside the United States, then the local government rules apply from that government, from that country. Again, if you have an agreement for reciprocal operation, that's great. And ARRL has a web section there that talks all about reciprocal operation. Third-party rules remain the same even when operating remotely. So if you're trying to communicate to a station that does not have a third-party operating agreement, you can't pass messages from somebody else. You can talk to the other operator can talk to you, that's two parties, but you can't carry a message from somebody else and bring it into the conversation. That's third party, that's what the third party rule is all about. All right, let's see if we remember anything. Let's look at some questions. So what is the maximum height above ground for an antenna structure not near a public use airport?
Charlie.
Everybody see that? Charlie, 200 feet, indeed. And under what conditions are state and local governments permitted to regulate amateur radio antenna structures?
Delta.
Remember those key two words: must be reasonably accommodated. Oh, that's 4 words. Reasonably accommodated. So when operating a U.S. station by remote control from outside the country, what license is required of the control operator? A U.S. operator primary station license is required. So when operating a station in South America by remote control over the internet from the U.S., what regulations apply?
Charlie.
Those of the remote station's country. And if they're in another ITU zone, you have to keep that in mind as well. So the frequency allocations of which ITU region apply to radio amateurs operating in North and South America.
Charlie.
Yes, we are in Region 2. Europe is Region 1, we're in Region 2, Australia, Pacific, Asia, Oceania is Region 3. All right. So what is the Volunteer Monitor Program?
Alpha.
Yes, they're amateur volunteers who are formally enlisted. They get training to monitor the airwaves for rule violations, coordinated by the ARRL. And which of the following are objectives of the Volunteer Monitor Program?
Delta.
It's all about self-regulation, to encourage amateur radio operators to self-regulate and comply with the rules. So what procedure may be used by volunteer monitors to localize a station whose continuous carrier is holding a repeater on in their area?
Bravo.
It's a radio direction finding, and maybe using one of those apps like I showed you there, comparing beam headings from the home locations with that of other volunteer monitors, and maybe you can triangulate and find out where the transmitter is located. Very good. All right. Section 3.2, amateur licensing rules. Back in the olden days, yikes, I'm old enough to remember some of this, the FCC used to directly license amateur radio operators. The exception were novice licensees, and someone could get a conditional license, which if you were a certain distance away from an FCC station, field office. And so here's a national map with the location of the field offices that exist or used to exist. In my region, I'm from Michigan originally, so there was an FCC field office in Detroit. And I remember going to this office, not for amateur radio. Somebody mentioned earlier before we got started their FCC commercial radio telephone license. I had one as well, a second class and then a first class. And so I remember walking through the doors of the FCC in downtown Detroit, and I kid you not, it looked a lot like this. There wasn't a computer in sight. This was back in the 70s. There were lots of filing cabinets, lots of clerks and ladies monitoring things, and lots of noise and hubbub and everything going on in the FCC office. But they had one room off to the side, and that's where you would go to take your test. And so I went there to take my commercial license test, but amateurs would also go there to take their amateur radio license test, and you'd be seated in a desk exactly like this. Oh, hard on the bottom. So it all changed in 1984. As part of FCC's trying to work more efficiently, they coordinated with a group, the National Council of Volunteer Exam Coordinators, NCVEC. There are 14 groups, 14 organizations who are volunteer examiner coordinators, and these are people who are authorized by the FCC to collectively prepare amateur radio exams and then to administer amateur radio licensing exams in the various regions in the United States. So keep in mind the VECs, that's an organization. And when you go to take your test, there will be at least 3 volunteer examiners, VEs. VEs are people, VECs, the organization. And volunteer examiners must have accreditation by their VEC. Sometimes they take a test, other times they just improve their experience. They must have a license class above the grade that is being tested. Oh, and Dave, would you spotlight my video? I just realized we're really small for the Zoom folks. Yeah, go down there, right there. Very good. We should have done that earlier. I apologize. So you have to have a license above the grade being tested. So if you've got a general class license, you can be a VE, but you can only give the technician test. And there must be 3 VEs present during testing, and they must be 18 years old. And so some of the big ones, the volunteer exam coordinators, the West Cars logo there on the left, West Carolina Amateur Radio Service, ARRL there in the middle, and W5YI is another one. So the question is, can a non-U.S. citizen be a volunteer examiner? And the answer is yes. If they're over 18 years old, if they have an amateur radio license in the United States, yes, they can be a volunteer examiner. And when you're taking your exam, at the end of your general class exam, and you pass, you will be given a certificate or a receipt. Well, it won't look like this. It'll look more like this. It's called the Certificate of Successful Completion of Exam, abbreviated CSCE. They're valid for 1 year. So if your paperwork gets lost, that's really their only function anymore, that you have, this is your only proof that you took the test and you passed the test. So retain this until your upgrade is logged into the FCC database. Then it just becomes a memento. You can keep it if you want to. But this is the CSCE, Certificate of Successful Completion of Exam. Have you got an expired license? Did you have a license before? There is a 2-year grace period, so when your license ends on a certain date, and you'll look on your license, it'll tell you what it's valid through a certain date. 2 years after that, you can just go online to the FCC website and renew your license. And you'll be given your license right back. You can't transmit, you can't talk or use your license until you're in the database again. But there is that 2-year grace period when it expires. Now, if you don't do anything and 2 years goes by, then your license is canceled. And it's possible after another year or two that your call sign that you used to have could be assigned to somebody else. Rarely happens, but it could happen. If you can demonstrate to the volunteer examiners at a test session that you've held a general, advanced, or extra class license in the past, and you can do that by having a copy of your old license, or maybe even an old call book that lists you with name and call sign, and your license was not revoked by the FCC for cause. Some people don't remember that one. You can actually get your old class of license back just by taking the technician test, element 2. So that's kind of a good thing. When you do that, a new license and call sign will be issued by the FCC. Then you might be able to use the Vanity Call Sign program to get your old call sign back. That's how that one works. When you take your general test and pass, and you will, you can immediately begin using your new privileges in the high frequency bands. All you need to do is to sign with your technician call sign, whatever that might be, stroke AG, which I say stands for acting general. You're not in the database yet as a general, but you passed, you have that certificate, and that's all you need. You can operate in the general class portion of the HF bands. You don't have to use stroke AG if you're on the local repeater, because you already had privileges to be on VHF, UHF, unless you want to brag, and some people do. So, but stroke AG, /AG, slant AG, just means that you passed your general class and you're good to go to operate. Do you speak another language? Sprechen Sie Deutsch? Habla Español? Can you have a QSO in another language? Yes. But remember the rule? After 10 minutes or at the end of a QSO, you always must ID with your call sign, and the ID must be in English because you have a U.S. license and English is our language. All right. More questions? Who may receive partial credit for the elements represented by an expired amateur radio license?
Alpha.
Any person who can demonstrate that they once held an FCC-issued general, advanced, or amateur extra class license that was not revoked by the FCC can get it back just by taking the technician test. And what license examinations may you administer as an accredited volunteer examiner holding a general class operator license?
Charlie.
Technician class only. Once you get your extra class, you can administer general and extra class because there is no license above extra. So on which of the following band segments may you operate if you are a technician class operator and have an unexpired certificate of successful completion for general class privileges?
Charlie.
Which band segments can you use? Well, you could always use any technician available band segments, but now any general, just remember to sign with your call sign, stroke AG. And who must observe the administration of a technician class license examination?
Alpha.
At least 3 volunteer examiners, and they must have a general class or higher themselves. Until an upgrade to general class is shown in the FCC database, when must the technician licensee identify with AG after their call sign? Everybody see that? You're right. Whenever they operate using general class frequency privileges. On that color chart, remember, there's sections we'll talk about that. So volunteer examiners are accredited by what organization?
Charlie.
Yeah, the volunteer examiners are accredited by a VEC, a Volunteer Examiner Coordinator, one of the 14 that I showed you there. And which of the following criteria must be met for a non-U.S. citizen to be an accredited volunteer examiner? You got it. The person must hold an FCC-granted amateur radio license of general class or above. So if you're a German ham with a U.S. call, you're fine. You know, U.S. license, you're good. So how long is the certificate of successful completion of exam valid?
Charlie.
1 year, 365 days. And what is the minimum age that one must be to qualify as an accredited VE?
Robin.
You have to be at least 18 years old. And what action is required to obtain a new general class license after a previously held license has expired and the 2-year grace period has passed? You have to talk to the VE team. The applicant must show proof of the appropriate expired license grant. I had a general, or I had an advanced, or I had an extra, and then pass the current technician test, the Element 2 exam. Very good. You've been great so far. I think it's time to take a break. So let's go ahead and take 5 minutes, get up, stretch, move around, and come on back, and we'll continue with Chapter 3. you got a chance to move around, stretch a little bit, and get back into it here with Section 3.3, Control Operator Privileges and Rules. And earlier I mentioned something, come back to me just for a second, Bruce, the color chart. This is what we call the color chart. It's produced by the American Radio Relay League. It's the U.S. Amateur Radio Bands chart is the real name for it. It's got all of the U.S. Amateur radio bands, and some of the bands, like 40 meters, 80 meters, have special frequency differences for general class operators, advanced class operators, extra class operators. Well, Gary, you can't get an advanced class anymore. True. But there still are advanced class operators because they can renew their license every 10 years. And so they still have to keep that distinction. So that's all listed here on the color chart. Also on the back is the worked all states map, the various sections here in the United States. If you ever operate field day, the little abbreviations for, East Los Angeles, or I don't remember what they all are. They're all East Texas is one, for example, is on here. So we send these out to you. I'll give you an email address here in a second. But if you can't wait, you can go ahead into this URL, ARRL's frequency chart page, and you can download the PDFs of these charts and print them out yourself. Pretty much every ham should have this in their ham shack, especially if you're operating on HF, because you want to make sure you're operating within the limits of your license. If you'd like to get one of these, I'll be happy to send one to you. Just send me an email, w4eey@arrl.net, and say, hey, Gary, I'd like one of the color charts, and here's my mailing address. I need your postal mailing address or I can't send you one of these. So the frequency and wavelength, remember we talk about amateur bands or the approximate wavelength, so 40 meter band or the 20 meter band or the 80 meter band, those are approximations of the wavelength of the signals in there. But if you want to know the exact wavelength, remember our old formula, 300 divided by the frequency in megahertz will give you the actual wavelength in meters. Or if you don't know the frequency but you do know the wavelength, you can do it the other way around. 300 divided by the wavelength in meters will give you a frequency in megahertz. So remember this, we talk about it in the technician class, and one of the first things we do. So when you get your general class, and you will have full privileges on these bands, 6 bands, 160 meters, 60 meters, 30 meters, 17 meters, 12 meters, and 10 meters. All of the World Administrative Radio Conference bands, which were new to amateur radio back in the 70s, I think, but not on what I call the old-timers bands. So 80, 40, 20, and 15, generals have privileges, but they're limited. If you look on the color chart, you'll see that there's a small segment that is just for the general class, then a little wider is for the general and advanced class, and then wider still is for extra class. So this was part of the FCC's incentive licensing program. The higher class of license you get, the more frequency spectrum you're able to get. So it's done by design. Now, if you look closely here, there's a legend. Still got my laser print. There's a legend right over here. If you have a color chart, you can get it out and take a look. And the first is the color red, which says RTTY and data, or radio teletype and data. So the question is, which band is data only? Well, there's one band that is red, and only red, and that's here. The 30 meter band, I think that's right. Yes. Actually, I worked on 30 meters today, a DX station in Sri Lanka using FT8. I lived in Sri Lanka for 4 years, but I've never worked Sri Lanka on the air until today. And it was on the 30-meter band. I had to limit my output power to 200 watts and had to take into consideration the antenna that I was using. But we made the connection and got a solid QSO on FT8 into Sri Lanka. So I was happy to do that on the 30-meter band, or 10 megahertz. 300 divided by 30 equals 10. So that's the pyramid we looked at before. All right. Slow scan TV. Slow scan TV sends audio tones from a photo converter through the microphone input of your radio and sends these tones out, which are decoded by a computer at the opposite end, and you get images like the one that you see right here. You can also download slow scan images from the International Space Station. So the radio is being set for lower sideband or upper sideband. So keep in mind, therefore, that slow scan TV, which is actually sequential images, is a voice mode. Wouldn't think of that, but okay. So the question is, can you send slow scan TV on 30 meters? Remember, 30 meters, RTTY and data only. So the answer is no, you can't. All right. Recognize one of these jobbies? Boy, when I was in high school, CB was going hot. And this was an old Cobra. Remember, with CB radio, you had channels. This is a 40-channel radio, and you had the knob there that you go click, 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 click. That's because the FCC has designated certain frequencies to operate on, and the channels, and so that's what you could operate on the 11-meter band or citizens band. Well, in amateur radio, our big knob doesn't go click, click, click. Our big knob is continuous tuning. So generally we say that amateur radio operators can operate within their limits of their license at any of the frequencies that are in that particular band. There is an exception. It is 60 meters or 5 megahertz, and this is true today. This will not be true next week. There are 5 channels on the 60-meter band. They're all 2.8 kilohertz wide, and you can operate data or voice, but no wider than 2.8 kilohertz, and with no greater output power than 100 watts. And that all changes on February the 13th. I heard it was February 16th. 13th? Okay. Anyway, the new allocation is that, this is Dave's slide and it builds, I didn't realize that, is that the center area right here is going to be widened. So it's going to be widened from 5351.5 to 5366.5. Hey, we got more frequencies, yay! And the power is going to be reduced in that area down to only 9 watts. So keep this in mind. If you're planning on operating on 60 meters, you can still operate at 100 watts here, or 100 watts here, 100 watts here, 100 watts here. But this new wider area right in the middle, which just happens to be the FT8 range right now, that's where I operated to get the Sri Lanka station this morning, is going to go down to 9 watts starting on the 13th. Besides being channelized, it's one of the few bands, 60 meters is, where there's a restriction of output power. Actually, it's based on effective radiated power. It's 100 watts to a dipole antenna. If your antenna has gain over a dipole, well, then you actually have to reduce your output power. So this is a strange rules here that don't generally apply. But 60 meters, we're talking about maximum output power is 100 watts to a dipole antenna. If you put up a 60-meter beam, you're going to have to reduce your output power. That's going to be one big beam, though. All right. looking closer, this is the 80-meter band, one of the old-timers bands. And here's what I was talking about, the distinction. General class can operate single sideband phone in this region. If there's somebody who has an advanced class that they've been renewing, they have a little bit extra frequency range in here. And the extra class, they can operate single sideband phone all the way down to here. This is where the DX lives. So it's where it's one of the reasons why you want to upgrade to extra if you're interested in DXing. Similar to the single sideband area here, the CW section down here, there are some limitations on general and advanced, whereas the extra class has the very bottom end of the band. So this is 80 meters. We say 80 meters, 75 meters because the band is so wide. Actually, this section down here could be characterized as 80 meters, and this section up here is characterized as 75 meters. Both are correct. All right. 40 meters also has the same kind of rules, not quite as egregious. Generals have a limitation here, where advanced and extra have full privileges. And then 20 meters, again, has the general, advanced, and extra. That's what we're looking at there. I hope you're active right now with your technician class license, probably operating on a local repeater. Are there repeaters on HF? You wouldn't think so, because HF, uses the ionosphere. You go up there and it's refracted back down and goes thousands and thousands of miles away. But yes, there are repeaters on HF above 29.5 megahertz in the 10-meter band. There are FM radio repeaters on HF. And you can actually get into them from hundreds, if not thousands of miles away and have your signal being rebroadcast. So you just know that that does exist. But again, it's at the very, very top end of the 10-meter band, only above 29.5 megahertz. And the radio repeater is electronic equipment, and then they use cavity filters, a series of like 6 cavity filters to keep the receiver and transmitter isolated if they're using a common antenna. This is a cavity filter, just one section for 10 meters. Kind of big. You're not typically going to be putting on the air a 10-meter FM repeater, but they do exist. On some bands, we are what we are known as secondary users. We share the bands with other licensed services, and sometimes they are primary, we are secondary. We must protect the primary users from harmful interference, and you cannot communicate with the primary users. You probably couldn't anyway, because they're using communications modes that we can't use or don't use. But if you see weird signals appearing in like the 30-meter band, don't try to interfere with it. Stay away from it. That's a primary user, and we can operate on other frequencies away from that because we are a secondary user. So 30 meters and 60 meters are both shared bands. And if you are interfered with by a primary user, if you were there first, it doesn't matter. You must QSY or go off the air, all right? Because we're secondary on those bands. 70 centimeters, the UHF band, we're also secondary there, by the way. Beacon stations are stations that a 100-watt transmitter and an antenna. They stay on a particular frequency, and they transmit a Morse code beacon. And you can see here on this world map the location of these Morse code beacon stations. And they operate on different frequency ranges, 20 meters, 15 meters, and they're put on the air by the Northern California DX Foundation. And so they share a frequency. The beacon frequency on 20 meters is 14.1 megahertz. And you'll listen for these various call signs at a certain time on the clock. And then you'll know, if propagation is open to that location. So you can be listening, for example, for the Sri Lanka station, the 4S7, to see if propagation is open to Sri Lanka at that time. Now, I hope you're going to be attending a ham fest sometime soon. Dave mentioned earlier that the Orlando Hamcation is coming up this weekend. We're all getting ready for that, and Dave's going to be there. I'm going to be there. Bruce is going to be there. So hope you, if you see us, come by and say hello. You may find one of these devices at a ham fest like that. And when I first saw this thing, I thought, that's a radio, right? To receive the beacon stations. No. It's a clock. That's what it is. It's telling you, you can change what band you're listening on here, and it'll tell you who should be transmitting in that time segment from the Northern California DX Foundation beacon stations. So you can be listening on a frequency and looking at the light on the clock, and if you can hear the signal, oh, okay, that's coming in from Sri Lanka, or it's coming in from Hong Kong, or wherever. So beacon aids. This is one of them. MFJ made this. It's a DX beacon monitor. It's not a radio. It's a clock. And as with everything nowadays, there's an app for that as well. The Northern California DX Foundation has a beacon app, at least for Android. I don't know if it's on iOS, that does the same thing as the MFJ unit. Want to have your own beacon? You can, but the Northern California DX Foundation had a lot of negotiations with other countries and to get them on the air and whatnot. So FCC will allow you to put a beacon station on the air 10 meters and up. U.S. amateurs can operate their own beacon stations between 28.2 and 28.3 megahertz on the 10-meter band. You can use automatic control. You can send Morse code from a recording or from the computer, etc. Again, limited to 100 watts output from the transmitter. And output from the transmitter, other than that one 60 meter that we were talking about before, broadcast licenses, if you're going to put an AM or FM station on the air, broadcast licenses specify effective radiated power. So if a station is licensed for 100,000 watts, their transmitter may only put out 20,000 watts. And they have an antenna that has gain to get it up to 100,000 watts. Ham radio power limits are different. Ham radio power limits are referenced to transmitter output power at the connector here at the radio. And so the maximum output power that amateur radio operators generally can use is 1,500 watts, with the exceptions that we've already talked about. I want to broadcast music. Can I be a DJ on amateur frequencies? No, you may not, unless, and this is a rare exception, if you have permission from NASA to retransmit their NASA ground master control frequency, and they happen to be waking up people in space with music. That used to be a thing. Mercury, Gemini, Apollo. It's not so much anymore. But that was the exception. You could rebroadcast music then. But no, on amateur frequencies, you cannot transmit music. Can you broadcast? Can I have a one-way transmission to the public? Only for Morse code training and then some informational bulletins. And can I retransmit a broadcast? Only propagation and weather forecast information intended for use by the general public that originated from United States government stations. So, again, amateur radio is a hobby where you talk with someone else. It's not amateur broadcasting, it's amateur radio. Can I use secret codes? You cannot obscure the meaning of something that if you're trying to transmit on the amateur radio frequencies. The only two exceptions are if you're controlling spacecraft in space through telemetry and control, or if you're controlling a radio-controlled model. Those transmissions can be encrypted because you don't want someone else taking over control. Those are the only exceptions. Otherwise, you can't obscure the meaning. Well, I learned all those Q codes. Aren't they a code? Yes. They're abbreviations and procedural signals, but they're used extensively and people know their general meaning. QSL means to confirm. QRT means I'm going off the air. QSY means I'm changing frequencies. So they're not obstructing the meaning of a message. So they're not a code. You're not encoding anything. Speaking of Q codes, QRP. That's a popular one. We were talking about, should you get a radio that's QRP, a low power radio? Some people say yes, some people say no. I say try it. You might like it. You can actually build a radio transmitter in an Altoids container. So just know that QRP is the Q code for reduced power operation, or will you reduce your power? You might have noted that the FCC got their start in 1934. The 1934 Communications Act came along, and from that act there was this word, which is my favorite radio word of all time: pecuniary, relating to or consisting of money. Ooh, I have a pecuniary interest in that. Can you advertise your business on amateur radio? No, because you've got a pecuniary interest in that business. Could I advertise for my buddy? No. What about the amateur radio shop and swap that is on Wednesday nights? Can I advertise my amateur radio transceiver? Yes. That is the exception to the rule. You can talk about amateur radio equipment for sale as long as it really is radio equipment. You're not talking about your car. And yes, you can sell your $13,000 ICOM IC7851 on the ham radio bands. That is allowed. That's the exception. We talked about third-party traffic before. We're just going to review here again. Third-party traffic is a message coming from someone else that you are going to carry and convey on to another country. It's okay to do if that country has a third-party agreement with the United States. It goes back to way before the internet, where local ministries of communications and post and telecommunications were concerned about their revenues from long-distance phone calls. And so they did not want third parties using amateur radio to circumvent their moneymaker. And so a lot of governments, a lot of countries would not approve third-party communications. Germany is one. Germany does not have a third-party communications agreement with the United States. And you can go to the American Radio Relay League website, and I'll show you here the URL in a second. Just know that unless there is a country-to-country agreement that says it's allowed, it's prohibited. You can't convey someone else's message. You can go to this URL over here on the right, and it's much more extensive than this, but a listing of the countries where we have third-party agreements. But like I say, sometimes they're surprising. Now, the internet, WhatsApp, everything else, that circumvented all of this. And this is, these regulations really are, form without substance. I mean, they just, okay, but that's the rules. Third-party messages may be messages relating to amateur radio or remarks of a personal character or messages relating to emergencies or disaster relief. So in emergency situations, some of the rules probably would be relaxed. But just know about the case for third-party messages. Now there's a special case. Let's see, there was a former ham whose license was revoked in his home country. He comes to you and asks if you can contact his brother, a licensed ham, by radio in their home country and pass a message to him. Even if there's a third-party agreement with that country, can you do it legally? No, because his license was revoked. If it were your brother who had the message and his license was revoked as well, no. Anyone who's had their amateur radio license revoked cannot utilize amateur radio. Want to put on a repeater? Is there a frequency space available in your area? One way to find out is to coordinate your repeater. Coordinated repeater is one whose frequency pair, the input frequency and the output frequency, are established by a local or regional organization. Keep everybody in their lane, keep everybody without interfering with other folks. If you go that route and you get a frequency pair from the regional area committee, then you have a coordinated repeater. If you just willy-nilly put a repeater on the air and it interferes with someone else, you're going to be made to take it off the air. That's called an uncoordinated repeater. And here in South Carolina, we're part of the Southeast Repeater Association, SARA. And so here's their information about how to coordinate a repeater here in our area. I'm sure your area has something similar. Now, a lot of times hams will put on the air a crossband repeater. Maybe if they want to talk into a local VHF repeater, but they want to use an HT that's a long ways away from the repeater, well, they might transmit into your car, and the car might convert it up to VHF and on out. That's a crossband repeater. Here's another kind of crossband repeater. Can a 10-meter repeater retransmit the 2-meter signal of a licensed technician in the 10-meter band? The technician doesn't have frequency privileges above 29.5. Yet, he'd be transmitting into this repeater on 2 meters where he is licensed. Is that okay? Yes, it's okay as long as the control operator of the 10-meter repeater has a general class license or above. Harmful interference, we don't want that. When hams are secondary users in a band, they have to protect the primary users. When stations are operating within 1 mile of an FCC monitoring station, or if you're using spread spectrum emissions, all of these require taking special steps to avoid harmful interference. And I'm not sure these are all active anymore, but these are the locations of the FCC monitoring stations like 5 years ago. The nearest one to us is in Powder Springs, Georgia. There used to be also one in Allegan, Michigan, but I don't know if it's still operating anymore. But if you're within 1 mile of these locations, you really need to stay off the air so that you're not going to impact their functions going on at the monitoring stations. Ooh, got one of these in your house, I bet. A Wi-Fi router. Did you know that the Wi-Fi router is a shared service with amateur radio? The first 8 channels on the 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi band are also amateur radio frequency allocations. 2390 megahertz to 2450 megahertz. Okay, why do we need to know about that? Well, Wi-Fi uses spread spectrum. And it's great because in the case of if you had a single frequency transmission and the interference was right on that frequency, you get nothing through. The interference takes over. But if you use spread spectrum over a range of frequencies, the interference on one frequency is only going to impact that one area, and some of the data will get through. That's the beauty of spread spectrum. We're not going to go in depth in the general class on spread spectrum. We do that a little bit more in the extra class. But I did want you to note that if you're using 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi at home, note that the channels overlap with each other. So they say you've got 11 channels on 2.4 gigahertz. You really don't. You only have 3 channels that are non-overlapping. Channels 1, channels 6, and channel 11. Just trivia. Now, you saw that Wi-Fi router I showed you before. Linksys routers are known for this, and others. They can be hacked. Their firmware can be modified with amateur radio firmware, and in so doing, you can actually generate something called a mesh network. when you do that, some interesting things are possible. First, you can't use that Wi-Fi router that's hacked for public Wi-Fi anymore. It's a private network now, and so you can connect to your buddy, across town. Though, unlicensed spread spectrum signal power, just out of curiosity, in Europe, the maximum is 100 milliwatts. That's the European standard. In the United States, the maximum is 1,000 milliwatts, or 1 watt. But with an amateur radio license, you can go up to 10 watts in this frequency range. So that's an interesting phenomena if you do happen to get into mesh networking using these modified routers. But remember that 2.4 gigahertz, also known as the 13 centimeter band, is shared. And when we do that hacking or go to higher power levels, can we communicate with these unlicensed devices? No. But we can produce our own independent mesh network to carry data, video, etc. And it's done for emergency communications, things like that. All right, more restrictions. Banned countries. In the United States, there are no prohibitions on contacting any country. Yemen has been on the air in the last year or two, so the slide is actually going to be updated. North Korea and Yemen were the ones that had no licensed hams. They've had some de-expeditions in Yemen, though. But still no amateur radio operators in North Korea. We're still waiting for P5 to come on the air. That's the prefix for North Korea. Countries who do not want to participate in amateur radio notify the ITU if they wish to restrict contacts. To my best of my knowledge, North Korea has not done that. However, there are no amateur radio operators in North Korea. All right, questions? On which HF and or medium frequency amateur bands are there portions where the general class licensees cannot transmit?
Charlie.
Remember the old timers bands. These are the ones where we have the limitations: 80 meters, 40 meters, 20 meters, and 15 meters. On which of the following bands is phone operation prohibited?
Bravo.
30 meters. 30 meters is a data-only band. On which of the following bands is image transmission prohibited?
Bravo.
This is a trick question. By image transmission, they're talking about slow scan TV image, which is a voice mode, which is not data. So again, it's prohibited on 30 meters. All right. Here's a question that's been deleted because things have changed. So no longer do you have to study for this question. All right. Here's a question. On which of the following frequencies are general class licensees prohibited from operating as a control operator? You probably would have to get your color chart out, which you can't do during the exam. But if you did get your color chart out, you would see that, yes, 7.125 to 7.175 are not available to general class operators. So which of the following applies when the FCC rules designate the amateur service as a secondary user?
Charlie.
Yes, we have to suck it up. We have to accept interference, and we must not cause harmful interference to the primary users. On which amateur frequencies in the 10-meter band may stations with a general class control operator transmit CW emissions?
Delta.
Oh, you got the trick question. I'm so proud of you. Yes, CW is allowed on any frequency in the bands. The differentiation between sideband and CW is that CW is mostly in the lower part of the bands. Single sideband, though, is restricted to the upper part of the bands. But CW is a valid modulation mode in any part of the band. Way to go. So which HF bands have segments exclusively allocated to amateur extra licensees?
Bravo.
Think the old timers bands again, 80, 40, 20, and 15. And which of the following frequencies is within the general class portion of the 15 meter band?
Charlie.
So if you didn't know which of these frequencies is in the 15 meter band, remember you could take 300 divided by 14.25 or 18.15 or 21.3 or 24.9, and you'd find out what the approximate wavelength is. Only one of these frequencies is even in the 15 meter band, and that is indeed Charlie, 21,300 kilohertz or 21.3 megahertz. What portion of the 10 meter band is available for repeater use?
Delta.
Yep, 29.5 at the very top. And when general class licensees are not permitted to use the entire voice portion of the band, which portion of the voice segment is available to them?
Bravo.
It is Bravo. It's the upper frequency portion of the band, of the single sideband portion. That's the green area. So with which of the following conditions must beacon stations comply?
Alpha.
I didn't specifically say this, but you are correct. No more than one beacon station may transmit in the same band from the same station location. And which of the following is the purpose of a beacon station as identified in the rules?
Alpha.
It is observation of propagation and reception conditions. So which of the following transmissions is permitted for all amateur stations?
Charlie.
Occasional retransmission of weather or propagation forecast information from U.S. government stations. And which of the following one-way transmissions are permitted?
Bravo.
This is the exception. Transmissions to assist with learning the International Morse Code. The ARRL station W1AW still transmits code practice at various times in the day. So what are the restrictions on the use of abbreviations or procedural signals in the amateur service?
Bravo.
Yeah, they may be used if they do not obscure the meaning of a message. And when is it permissible to communicate with amateur stations in countries outside the areas administered by the FCC?
Alpha.
Not Alpha.
Bravo.
Bravo. It's when the contact is with amateurs in any country, except those whose administrations in that country have notified the ITU that they object to such communications. Kind of long way around the barn, but yeah, that's it. On what HF frequencies are automatically controlled beacons permitted for you?
Delta.
It's going to be in the 10 meter band. You can put a beacon station on the air in the 10 meter band, 28.2 to 28.3 megahertz. And what is the power limit for beacon stations?
Charlie.
100 watts. Peak envelope power, that's what PEP stands for. And which of the following would disqualify a third party from participating in sending a message via an amateur station?
Alpha.
If they had a license that's been revoked, revoked licenses, you're done with amateur radio. When may a 10-meter repeater retransmit the 2-meter signal from a station that has a technician class control operator?
Delta.
If the 10-meter repeater's control operator holds at least a general class license, then it's all okay. The technician could not put on the 10-meter repeater. All right, which of the following conditions require a licensed amateur radio operator to take specific steps to avoid harmful interference to other users or facilities? Read carefully.
Delta.
Yeah, I realized I should have put blue text on that slide, and I didn't do that. When operating within 1 mile of an FCC monitoring station, when using a band where the amateur service is secondary, or when a station is transmitting spread spectrum, all of those choices. And what are the restrictions on messages sent to a third party in a country with which there is a third party agreement?
Early.
They must relate to amateur radio or be remarks of a personal character or messages related to emergencies or disaster relief. In what part of the 2.4 gigahertz band may an amateur station communicate with non-licensed Wi-Fi stations?
Delta.
Yeah, no part. You can't do it. We share spectrum, but you can't communicate. And why should an amateur operator normally avoid transmitting on 14.1, 18.11, 21.15, 24.93, and 28.2 megahertz? What do you think?
Alpha.
Those are beacons. Yeah,
Those are
alpha.
beacon frequencies. So the system of propagation beacon stations operates on those frequencies. We only really looked at 14.1. But all right, when may third-party messages be transmitted via remote control?
Alpha.
It is alpha. In the United States, under any circumstances in which third-party messages are permitted by FCC rules. You still have to follow third-party rules, is the point of that. All right, section 3.4, technical rules and standards. So we as amateur radio operators try to observe good engineering practice in putting our stations together, and good amateur practice, being considerate of other people, considerate of safety, etc. Who decides if we're using good engineering and good amateur practice? The FCC decides. And one rule that they have is, if you can, use only the minimum power necessary to carry out a desired communication. So yes, we might have the ability to transmit 1,500 watts, but if you think 500 watts is going to make the connection, that's the power level to use. Use the minimum power necessary to carry out the desired communication. And you've heard me mention 1,500 watts peak envelope power. That is the legal limit in the United States. And you'll see linear power amplifiers available for amateur use. And there are two types of amplifiers being sold commercially. Continuous commercial service, which means that you could transmit 100% all the time, or something called intermittent commercial and amateur service, ICAS. These amplifiers are built a little less robustly. They expect you to be transmitting and then receiving for a while, and transmitting and then receiving for a while, so they can cool down. Just be aware that these two kind of general classes of RF power amplifiers exist. Now, generally on all the bands, that's our limit, 1,500 watts. Again, the exceptions, 60 meters, which is 100 watts, reference to a dipole, and 30 meters, which is 200 watts on 4 of the 5 channels coming up starting next week. Now, 1500 watts, here's the math. Here's how you can calculate the output power. We're not going to make you do that. It's not part of the test, but some folks want to know how it's done. We'll talk more about it in the extra class, so come on back. All right, I think this is the last section, digital communications. Something happened. The FCC made a change. They used to specify baud rates as being the maximum symbol rate that you could use on the HF bands, but they made a change in 2023 and they replaced the baud rate limit on amateur high frequency bands with a bandwidth limit, 2.8 kilohertz bandwidth. So that is the rule as it exists today. Now you'll see in your book table on 3.4, they're talking again about the symbol rate or the baud rate. You get a little idea about the bandwidth there over on the right. Below 10 meters, it was that you could only transmit 300 baud. Above 10 meters, it began to increase to 1200, 19.6, 56, and then no limit. So you needed to know maximum symbol rates. Just be aware of these now, that these are the symbol rates that are typical. But right now, the rule is bandwidth, 2.8 kilohertz. New digital modes. Is there anything new under the sun? Well, absolutely. Although it's not so new anymore. They've been out for a long time. FT8 and FT4. Some amateur radio operators and scientists, Joe Taylor, K1JT, Steve Frank, K3AN, who I think is the silent key, and Bill Somerville, a G4JJS, maybe he's the silent key. They were the ones who were behind FT8 and the software WSJTX. WSJT software was first developed in 2001 for meteor scatter software, and there's an article in QST magazine that talked about this new mode of operating, and it was widely publicized. Other hams could read about it, could experiment with it, could even modify the software if they so chose. And so WSJTX software came out, and FT8 is probably the most popular digital mode that's out there today. As I mentioned, I worked Sri Lanka today on 30 meters at 10 megahertz using FT8. Now, WSJTX software is still available. It's available for free. It's now on SoundForge. It used to be from the Princeton University website, but now there are forks of WSJTX, and I just want to make you aware of something called WSJTX Improved. This is what I use, and I've had really good luck with it. It provides some additional features, some additional capabilities that the original software doesn't have, and it's also available in a widescreen version, so just be aware of it. It's being developed by a German physicist, or he's a doctor, I'm not sure what he is, but anyway, and doing a great job. So when contemplating developing new communications protocols, Dr. Taylor and Uwe, I can't think of his last name, the other doctor in Germany, they need to write about the new mode and the standards that are going to be used. They need to publicly document the technical characteristics, enable peer review and comment, and strive for continued improvement. These are the 4 pillars of new communications protocols. And of course, FT8 came out and was so popular that it begat FT4, which is more for contesting. It has a shorter transmission time, shorter reception time. You can make more contacts in a shorter period of time. Questions? So who or what determines good engineering and good amateur practice as applied to the operation of an amateur station? See that? Who decides what's good? The FCC decides what's good. What is the maximum transmitter power an amateur station may use on 10.14 megahertz? You remember?
800 divided by 10.140.
This is 30 meters.
This is, 10.140 is 30 meters, and so the limitation is 200 watts. That's what I had to use to talk to Sri Lanka. And I wasn't talking, I was communicating. I was on FT8. It's not a conversation. That's what a lot of older hams have a problem with. All right, what is the maximum transmitter power an amateur station may use on the 12-meter band?
Charlie.
Yep, you can use the full 1,500 watts on 12 meters. What is the maximum bandwidth permitted by FCC rules for amateur stations operating on USB frequencies in the 60-meter band? It is 2.8 kilohertz. And what is the limit for transmitter power on the 28 megahertz band for a general class operator?
Charlie.
That's the 10-meter band. You can use full power, 1,500 watts. And what is the limit for transmitter power on the 1.8 megahertz band? There is our standard limit, 1,500 watts. And what must be done before using a new digital protocol on the air?
Charlie.
One of the pillars is you publicly document the technical characteristics of the protocol. And what is the maximum symbol rate permitted for RTTY, or data emission transmitted at frequencies below 28 megahertz? I'm not sure this question still exists, but I didn't see any cancellation of it.
Yeah, I think it's still there as 300, so that needs to be the right answer.
Yeah, so the answer is 20 megahertz is 10 meters. It's going to be 300 baud. Just keep that in mind, although they changed it to 2.8 kilohertz wide bandwidth. Next question was deleted because it's changing on the 60-meter band. What is the maximum symbol rate permitted for RTTY, or data emission transmissions, on the 10-meter band?
Charlie.
Charlie.
Yeah, so 10 meters and up, it starts to change, so it's 1,200 baud. And what measurement is specified by FCC rules that regulate maximum power?
Delta.
Yep, it's PEP output right at the transmitter connector. And what is the maximum PEP output allowed for spread spectrum transmissions?
Bravo.
Bravo.
Remember we said we could modify a Wi-Fi router with software and maybe add an amplifier. We can get up to 10 watts for a mesh network. And what is QRP operation?
Bravo.
That is low power transmitting operations. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of chapter 3. You made it. I am so proud of you. Dave, if you would maybe remove the spotlight, and we have some extra time. If there are any questions or comments you'd like to make, feel free to come on in. Anybody in the Zoom classroom?
Okay, for next week, you're going to be splitting chapter 4 into 2 sessions. So which sections are we going to be covering for the first week? Because I really want to intentionally go over this one. It's getting above my grade.
Over to you, Dave.
Yep, very good. Yes, chapter 4 is split into 2 sessions, as Steve mentioned. And for next week, we want to read pages 4-1 through 4-19. That's what we're going to be covering next week. The following week, we'll do the rest of the chapter. It's 46 pages altogether. Now, just a word about this chapter. You'll look at it and you might tip over, okay? It looks really scary. There's a lot of stuff there, and they go into some detail about how they come up with some of the answers mathematically. The good news is that much of that information is not needed for the actual exam questions. So I'm going to guide you through that, and it might look really scary, but if y'all will hang in there with me, we'll give you shortcuts and ways of dealing with that that will make this doable. So as you read through this part of the chapter, pages 4-1 through 419, don't get so scared that you want to give up, okay? Because we'll help you through that.
Absolutely. Any other comments or questions? This weekend in Orlando, Florida, if you're going to be in the area, Hamcation at the fairgrounds there, I would love to meet you. So just come on by if you see us and say hey. Until next week then, y'all. 73.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.